great evening, and great evening once again. I am Sonya, your host for tonight, which is a very special edition for me for tonight. So, I am going to be bringing the heat to the IG, the Facebook, and the YouTube streets. Tonight is a special edition. Something I decided to do last minute, spontaneous, because today makes 1 year since I've been podcasting, since I started my very first live when it was Essence of the Soul. So I wanted to celebrate with all of you and talk about what we have done over the past year. So I started writing it down, and I got all of this to share with you, but in respecting time, I'm not going to take too long, I promise. But so my very first live, then it was called Essence of the Soul, and it was about self-love, saying it's okay to say no, and who is speaking to you. So on my very first live, I thought I was doing something. I was nervous at first, but then when I pressed that button, I just let it go. And at the end, well, before the end, I was getting these text messages, and I'm like, I can't answer this because it's on my phone, and that's where I'm streaming from. So I was ignoring the text messages, ignoring the phone calls. I was just giving it everything I had. I dropped the mic at the end. I was so excited and relieved it was over, but excited to see what type of impact that I left with the first episode. And then I read my text messages. It's my mentor. And he's asking me, Sonia, do you need help? And I'm like, help with what? I'm like, I got this. And then I get a phone call from my sis. And she tells me I wasn't live. I was like, what? Now, it was already late at night, but I was determined. I said, you know what? I'm gonna do it again. I said, I don't care who's gonna be able to watch because they'll catch the replay. I'm gonna do it again. So now, by the time I got myself together, figured out what I did wrong, which I somehow or another pressed private instead of public on Instagram. Um, I was streaming to myself. I was talking to myself. I was dropping the mic by myself. But you know what? I told my sister I'm gonna do it again. She was on there with me, and 1 o'clock in the morning it was by then. But I did it again. And I was very proud of myself that I did it again. Because I could have just said, I'll forget about it, I'll do it another day. But I was determined. And so I did it again. So that was my episode number 1. So we talked about active listening and forgiveness and self-doubt and burning the doubt in episodes 2 and 3. And I was watching myself. I actually watched clips of each episode tonight while I was gathering my information. And by the 4th episode, we talked about seniors with trips and falls. And I'm sitting there saying, well, this isn't what I originally was going to talk about, but this is what I feel on my heart. I started to become more comfortable. I even started saying reporting live. I was like, oh, no, she didn't. So I was really starting to become comfortable because I have all of you to thank for that. By episode 5, I started bringing it with posters, y'all. I had pictures, I had graphics. We talked about domestic violence awareness, and I got emotional and talking about the statistics. Episode 6, we started adding music to the posters, and I was counting my blessings when we talked about anti-bullying. Episode 7 was mental health. And I started really emphasizing excited. Episode 8, I talked about 4 steps to remain safe. And I started inviting the viewers and asking them where were they tuning in from. And I started saying hello, hello, hello. Episode 9 was National Homeless and Youth Awareness. And I brought that on a Friday because I couldn't do my episode on Wednesday because the conflict with my job schedule. And so I said I was going to have that episode number 9 on a Friday, and I did. Episode 10, I was standing up. Episode 10, I'm standing up in the hallway. And I invited and brought on my first guest. That was my daughter, Miss Brittany Mack. And she wasn't playing with me. She was pushing back. She was challenging me. She was relentless. She was relentless. She was giving me my own medicine. She was not playing any kind of games with me. She was stretching me for sure. But you know what? It was all good. It was all good. And I was appreciative in the end. It was uncomfortable, but I realized you have to be uncomfortable to be comfortable. So here I am. I'm just going to go for it. So after episode 9, I started doing pop-ups. Episode 11, I brought the male perspective, and I had 2 special, amazing, handsome, and distinguished panelists. And I asked them about the male perspective. And that was Ernesto. And I had Mitch come on, and we were talking about the man's point of view, the male perspective, and what they thought about the active, well, I should say the activity of a male crying, showing emotion. So that was remarkable. Episode 12, I shared my birthday trip to DC that Namari and my granddaughter Janaya, we took together, and we talked about the Indigenous Native American Indian Museum. And episode, let's say 13, talked about grateful and thankful giving. And actually that was a special edition. That was my first special edition that I had on a Saturday. And my big sis, Coach Dawn Allen, she made her JV partnership debut. And then that Saturday, we were together in Maryland. We went down, Dawn flew in from Florida, and we drove down to Maryland because our uncle had passed on, and that was his wake. And we still didn't want to miss our episodes because we vowed to never miss them if at all possible. So we just did them from Maryland. And that's the great thing about having a podcast. You can take it anywhere with you. And so we did just that. Episode 14, we talked about eight ways to build self-love. I gave you 8. You don't get 8 anymore, but then I was feeling my Cheerios. I gave you 8. And then we did the 12 days of Christmas in December. And then I started bringing the heat to the IG streets. And when we were talking about the 6 days of Christmas, on January 1st, 2024, I started asking questions. And then I was being tested. Episode 36, Ideally Santiago at that time was the host of Ideals with Ideally. I think now her podcast is Speakeasy with Ideally, but she was my guest in episode 36. We talked about self-love. We talked about the 30-day challenge. I received the Iconic Pioneer Award. Um, that's one of the awards here. Also, the Impactor Award and the Be Iconic Builder Award. By episode 40, uh, Essence of the Soul podcast had a new name. It became the Sonya Dungee podcast, where conversation is always the essence of the soul. On that same podcast, I announced the grand prize winner who was invited to co-host for the day. Well, I didn't announce, I announced it before. I'm sorry. That day, episode 40, Miss Lillian Estrella came. She was the grand prize winner. So she was my co-host for the day. And the first runner up was my sis, Coach Dawn Allen, CEO and host of Stay Sexy Wellness. She joined us as well. We talked about discouraged and encouraged in within the year, actually starting in 2024. We talked about systemizing and encourage your skill set. Um, I accepted Coach Dawn Allen's 30-day water challenge. I announced the winners of the self-love, self-care challenge. Um, we had a pop-up and we talked about appreciating the appreciation. I made a guest appearance on Happily Healed with Tennille. Uh, we had Love Thyself first part, and part two, we had a pajama party, and I invited my sis, Coach Dawn Allen, to come on because I knew she'd be brave enough to wear those pajamas along with me. In February, I was a special guest on the Bren Harris podcast. Um, I talked about Your Voice Mattered in another episode. In episode 43, I had my special guest, Yolanda Cooksey, come on. I also was a special guest on her podcast. Um, and that was the Living Well podcast. Episode 45, we did in honor of Women's History Month. And I had a special guest make an appearance, Mr. Anthony Smith, host of Making Sense Out of Nonsense. And I surprised him because even though it was Women's History Month, Mr. Anthony Smith always speaks so highly of his deceased wife. And I wanted to honor him by having him come on for Women's History Month and celebrate and honor his wife. So we did that. We did a podcast where we triumphed over hardship. After episode 47, I started a walk and talk with Sonya in the mornings, and sometimes I pop up afternoon, evening, or lunchtime as we were cooking. Episode 40, we had hidden hardships. March of this year, I hosted my first Boss Overcomer Masterclass. In episode 49, we celebrated Women's International Month in Dungee fashion, where I honored the some of the many Dungee women, and international because I have a very international family. In high school, they used to call me the Walking United Nations building because I have such a diverse family, and I'm proud of that. We did our Easter brunch and went live with the Eastern Farm Workers Bureau Association. We did in episode 52, we unleashed hardship. 54, we empowered through self-love and self-care, and we had a special guest, Miss Regina McDermott. Episode 56, overcoming hardship as an amputee with a special guest, Miss Sharice Kelly. In episode number 57, we did going from addiction to sobriety one day at a time, and we had a special guest, Mr. Osmond Fletcher. Mr. Osmond Fletcher, that's a mouthful. We also did in May. Actually, it was Cinco de Mayo, but it's also National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Native Women and Girls. And by now, all of you know I am Indigenous, Native American, Indian, and proud of that as well. And I felt that I needed to bring awareness to the National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Native American women and girls. Uh, in episode 59, we gave tribute to moms. Episode 60, we had a special guest and author, Miss Tashi Smart. Her book, I Too Have a Story. We laid flags at Calverton National Cemetery for Memorial Day. That's where my dad's remains are interred as well. So that's close and very near and dear to my heart. We closed out May with the 5 transformational connections to self-discovery and empowerment with a workshop. Alongside me was Coach Yolanda Cooksey and Coach Dawn Allen, Mr. Anthony Smith, and Mr. Mitch Race. I spoke about life's blueprints, and in June, we had a special guest appearance. Actually, it was more like it was my guest appearance on the Marian Cadet podcast, but because we had some issues, because Marian Cadet lives outside of the United States, so I jumped on my live, but I was a guest, and she took over the podcast because it was the Marian Cadet podcast after all. I got to march in the Puerto Rican Day Parade in NYC with my daughter Brittany. And so we did some lives around that as well. We did random acts of kindness. Exit. I keep saying exit for some reason. Episode number 67. We did a Father's Day tribute as well. We spoke about Juneteenth. I did a second masterclass and a third one in July. We celebrated again with the Eastern Farm Workers Association and their 52nd anniversary, and I did a couple of lives while there. In episode number 72, I started using this platform of StreamYard for streaming purposes. And what I forgot to mention before is in a previous episode, you got to hear Namari at 8 months. He made his debut. That was in my earlier podcast. You heard him crying in the background, but we didn't see him, but we got to hear him for the first time at 8 months old. And then in episode 70, it was 74, in the middle of our podcast, you could hear Namari in the background. He was having a meltdown, honey. And you could hear his mama talking about no more milk. And I was like, no, they didn't. But you know what? In hindsight, it's part of life. It's part of life. They're my family. And you see Namari a lot. I call him my little AV man. You see him if we're at McDonald's when we do a pop-up or a walk and talk, or sometimes just during my podcast, he'll come and stick his little head around and let himself be seen and heard. So wanted to bring that to your attention too. So in episode 77, we had the Arnett Jones story, Overcoming Rejection. She was our special guest. And for the first time live, she shared with us her story of how she was rejected from the time that she was 6 years old. And she shared her story of overcoming. And as a host, I used my judgment call, and I did not want to interrupt her in any way. I just let her go because she was doing a phenomenal job at sharing her story. And I felt like if I would have stopped her, it just would have been detrimental. Everybody needed to hear. Everybody needed to hear her story. So I did have questions for her. And so I asked her to come back. So in episode 78, we had the great debate, no room for debate. And then by our last episode, which was episode 82, is when um, Arnett, lovely known as Nettie 108 in her podcast, she came back. And at that point, I was able to recap her story. And I was able to then ask questions along the way. And then I gave her the second half of her story to explain it further, because it was important to know how she was able to overcome rejection. We're all overcomers of one thing or another. We are all overcomers. And it was just so important to hear that, because when I was going through my grief and my hardship, the despair and that feeling stuck, and I felt like I didn't have any direction, I didn't have anyone to turn to, until my mentor found me and I found my mentor. So I wanted you to hear how she did it. And so that was episode 82. So in this year, there has been so much growth. There has been so many topics of discussion. There has been many JV partnerships. I have had an overwhelming response from viewers and even guests, former guests, that have shared with me what this podcast has done for them. And as I said from the beginning, this podcast has never been about me. It was meant for those that needed to hear and watch so that they can make a conscious decision in their forward progression. So, in that 1 year and 82 episodes later, as I shared on my platforms, not only has the name of the podcast changed, there has been so much more testimonies of breakthroughs, healing, repairing, strengthening in communities, JV partnerships, and podcasts formed. And I have been truly humbled and blessed. I will continually Proverbs 3, 5, 6 it all day, every day, while my journey continues helping those who I was assigned to. As long as there is breath in me, and as long as God wills it, I am going to be here. I am going to keep telling my story. I am going to continue to encourage others to tell their stories. It's important. We all have a story to tell. We all have a story to tell. Whether we want to believe it or not, it or whether we don't, but we do. And for me, I've never questioned why. I always knew that there was more. I always knew I was here for a purpose. You see, we all beat out 499 billion to be here. We all are valuable. We really all are. No matter what you're feeling at the moment, trust me when I tell you we are. I have done so much learning and so much growing, but I still have a long way to go. I really have a whole lot to go. And you might see me looking down. I'm out because I'm really choking back tears. Because if somebody would have told me I was going to be doing this, I wouldn't have believed it. And for a year, never. Never. So I also wrote on another one of my platforms a few years ago. I went from grieving, suffering in silence, feeling stuck, doing the bare minimum with the same old tired routine day in and day out, with no direction, no end in sight, for 342 days straight, before even taking the first step in moving forward beyond grief. So fast forward today, I'm a transformation coach that is walking in my true calling. I help those who are struggling with hardship, grief, life challenges go from suffering in silence, feeling isolated, stuck with no direction, no end in sight, to become resilient and empowered with clarity, vision, and an attitude of expectation and excellence in reaching their highest potential. And reaching their highest potential. I know there is a lot more work that needs to be done. This is just the beginning. But I want to thank you for this amazing year. And 82 episodes later, this Wednesday will be episode 83 already. And besides the 82 episodes, the walk-in talks and the special editions, the pop-ups, all of that, I want to thank you for trusting and believing in me and standing by me through the technicalities, through the being tested, through the being late because I couldn't get on, or for sometimes me ranting. But when I rant, it's because I believe something so deeply in my heart that I can't help it. And sometimes it is long, but you rock with me. So I want to thank you so much and let you know I value you. I pray for you. I appreciate you. I'm so grateful for you. I see you. I hear you. I feel you. Because those of you that are struggling in the hardship and the grief, I once was you. And I just want to be here as that beacon of light I want to be here as that mentor. I want to continue to be a transformation coach. I want to continue to keep bringing it to you with passion, with dedication. And in my master classes, I want to still bring you that value. And in my master courses, be able to empower and uplift and give you the necessary tools so that you can continue on your journey with empowerment. And you could reach your goals and your dreams that you thought you would never be able to do. That's what I want more than anything. And it might now be after 11 o'clock at night. And you might catch the replay because you were asleep. And it's great. Because whether I had 0 on here or I had 100 on here, the replay is going to play. And the ones that this episode was meant for, they're going to see it and they're going to receive it. As I always tell you, continue to look in that mirror. Talk to the self-image. It is detrimental, especially now. We got too much going on in this world. Too much. We're in spiritual warfare, at the very least. Reassure that self-image that it's valuable. It's a child of God first and foremost. And that negativity that people keep trying to throw at you, trust me, because I've been getting it too. Bottle it. Use it for fuel. Let it catapult you. Don't get caught up in it. Because being transparent, I was recently caught up in it. And once I realized, I had to snap out of it. I had to snap out of it. Because I can't come to you and ask something of you that I'm not doing myself. Trust and believe. I snap right back. Be safe. Stay well. If you're not feeling your best, please get to the doctor. Don't ignore a little symptom or something that just would have been small that ended up being something snowballed into a bigger thing because you ignored it. And when I say be safe, please watch your back. Just be safe. Be aware of your surroundings at all times. God bless you all. And remember, be always destined for greatness. Your greatness, your very best, not to be compared to anyone else's middle. Until my pop-up tomorrow, bye for now. before I end it, I wanted to jump over to my my community, my cheerleaders on Instagram. Thank you, Godson. I love you too. Thank you for the congratulations. God is good. Yes. Thank you so much. Helping trans. I'm here for. Thank you for expressing the value and to co-sign that the mirror is so needed. Amen to that. So I wanted to thank all of you as well. And I might not be able to see your comments, but now I come looking for them. So God bless you all. Thank you so much for joining. Know that I love you all, and I will see you all very soon. Bye for now.